So Jack Della Maddalena has just beaten Belal Muhammad by decision. I thought JDM would win. I made some good money off JDM by decision. Jack's one of my favourite fighters and I'm very happy to see him win, especially against a guy who's as annoying as Belal Muhammad. I honestly thought JDM won every single round of the fight. Round 4 was the closest, but even then I thought JDM had the more effective shots. Even though his back was to the cage, he was landing great shots on the chin of Belal, and he did hurt Belal in that round. So I had a clean sweep, 5 rounds to none. And after such a good performance, once again, we're going to look at all the potential opponents for JDM in the future, from 155 to 185, and judge them based on their chances of winning. And our first fighter is going to be Shavkat Rakhmonov. I'm going to put Shavkat all the way down in low chance. I know that's going to surprise a lot of people. I know people tend to be very high on Shavkat, but to be honest, I've never really seen anything in him that separates him from the guys who also have a V at the end of their name. I would have been a bit more sceptical of JDM beating Shavkat before the Gilbert Burns fight because of his takedown defence. But since that fight, and especially yesterday versus Belal, we saw real improvements in his takedown defence. Belal only got 3 takedowns across the entire fight and barely had any control time with them. I think Belal is a better offensive wrestler than Shavkat, so Shavkat's path to victory would be on the feet, and I think JDM's much better. I thought Ian Garry was a level above Shavkat on the feet. Also, if you look at it stylistically, Shavkat stands very tall and doesn't really put his hands up, so a guy who's as accurate as JDM would be catching him on the chin, and I can see him doing what Jeff Neal failed to do, and for that reason Shavkat is all the way down there. Our next fighter after this is going to be Ian Garry, who's going to go alongside Shavkat. Now this is a bit of a weird one because Ian Garry I think is very capable of beating JDM. As good as JDM is, he has quite slow feet, and comparatively Ian Garry is very light on his feet. He does move very well and he's got great shot selection. However, similar to Shavkat, he does rely on his reflexes quite a lot, and he does get caught on occasion. Considering this would be a 5-round fight, it's hard to see Ian Garry striking with JDM for 25 minutes and not getting caught seriously by something. It took a long time for Carlos Prates to find his timing, but eventually he did find it. And once Prates found his timing, he was desperate to survive. And considering that JDM is better on the feet than Carlos Prates in every way outside of power, and considering that Prates had Ian Garry in the Anthony Smith position for several minutes, I think it's clear to see JDM winning. Moving on further up to the most likely next opponent for JDM, Islam Makhachev. Makhachev has said he will move up to face JDM because Belal is no longer champion, and to me this is a very hard one to call. On one hand, Islam is way better offensively on the ground compared to Belal. He's also more dangerous on the feet, but at the same time Islam is not a natural welterweight, and we have seen another Australian fighter who works with Craig Jones have a very close competitive fight with Islam. Volkanovski was a 145-pounder moving up, but at the same time Volkanovski is one of the best defensive wrestlers in the sport. Volk was a wrestler first before becoming a striker, and everything down to his fighting stance and his body type is very well built for takedown defence. JDM on the other hand stands quite tall and has a high guard, but at the same time he may get even better at defending takedowns. I think Islam is just as hittable on the feet as Belal is. If JDM can stuff the same amount of takedowns he stuffed versus Belal versus Islam, I think we'll basically see a repeat of the Belal fight. But that is a big if. Islam is the best grappler in the sport. Belal himself would tell you that he gets bitched every time he wrestles with Islam in sparring. It's a very hard one to call, but I favour JDM very slightly over Islam. Moving on to someone who's a bit further down, Joaquin Buckley. Buckley is going to go right in the middle in decent chance. Buckley may not be as technically sound on the feet as Ian Garry, but he's much more dangerous. JDM's defense on the feet looks really good versus Belal. He looks very slick, he was moving out of the way, but he was getting hit clean to the head on occasion. And I don't think anybody in the division has a guaranteed shot to beat Joaquin Buckley because of how dangerous he is. But if anybody was to beat Joaquin Buckley, I think it would be JDM. All of Joaquin Buckley's issues on the feet tend to be against boxers who throw straight punches. We saw that versus Kevin Holland in his debut. We saw that versus Nursultan Ruziboev. I think JDM would snipe him with a straight right hand and maybe put him out. But because the fight will be on the feet, Buckley always has a good puncher's chance. Which takes us a bit further up to Sean Brady. Brady is going to go alongside Islam in the close fights here. I'd argue Sean Brady is actually more dangerous for JDM than Islam, simply because Sean Brady is a massive welterweight. I think he's better offensively on the ground than Belal is, and he's really suited his style on the feet to be an offensive wrestler. What we saw versus Gilbert Burns and versus Leon Edwards is that Brady used volume to make sure his opponents have no time to breathe, and he could definitely do the same thing versus JDM. However, we have seen if Sean Brady gets his takedown stuffed, Sean Brady does shit himself if he can't get a takedown. We saw that versus Michael Chiesa, and then we saw that again versus Belal Muhammad. If JDM can stuff most of Sean Brady's takedowns, I think he's guaranteed to knock him out. But Sean Brady is a nightmare to deal with, and that's why he's in close fight. Moving on further down to Charles Oliveira, I know this fight's very unlikely to happen, but Oliveira is open to moving up to 170. So it's a potential fight. I think JDM simply lights him up on the feet. Oliveira's defense is not very good. He's not going to take down JDM if Belal struggled to do it, so that's why he's in low chance. Moving on to another lightweight, we have Arman Tsarukyan. Arman and Islam are on quite similar levels on the feet and on the ground. Islam is just a bit more calculated and a bit more dominating. Arman though definitely does go underrated in these conversations. I see Arman having more success versus JDM on the feet than Islam would, simply because of one move, and that's the body kick. The body kick of Belal Muhammad was landing all the time on JDM. Because JDM's guard is more boxing based, he's not really ready to catch kicks. So Tsarukyan could do his thing at distance and mix in the takedowns to make it a competitive fight. But at the same time, Tsarukyan is hittable on the feet and JDM would most likely catch him. That takes us to another fighter who is Kamaru Usman. Originally I was going to put Usman in low chance, but it doesn't feel right to put Usman in low chance versus anyone. He's a very difficult fighter to beat convincingly. He's really strong on the ground, really strong on the feet. He's not as good on the feet as JDM obviously, but he is very powerful unlike Belal, and he would blend the striking with the wrestling in a much more imposing way compared to Belal, because he does have more power. I actually would pick Usman over Belal, and I'm also going to pick him over joaquin Buckkley. Mainly because of the jab. I think that's going to be a really good weapon versus Buckkley. That's why Usman's in decent chance despite his old age. But you do have to pick JDM being fresher, younger, more dangerous on the feet, etc. Moving on to another fighter who is Conor McGregor. I always put McGregor in these tier lists for one reason: extra view time and more views. If I mention Conor McGregor's name in a video, that name then gets associated in the algorithm, so if someone searches up Conor McGregor, there's a chance this video pops up, so then I can get the casuals watching the video. Obviously JDM would demolish Conor. Moving on to another fighter who is Leon Edwards. Edwards is going in the low chance tier. I feel like a lot of people have forgotten about Edwards, and that's for good reason. He's fucking boring. Leon was originally supposed to face JDM in UFC London instead of Sean Brady. I think JDM would have knocked him out then, and he'd still knock him out now. JDM would be on the front foot and Leon would shit himself. His chin's not great, so JDM would knock him out. Moving on to the middleweight division, see how JDM would do if he moved up. And first of all, the champion, Dricus du Plessis, will go in the will win tier. First of all, the jump between welterweight and middleweight might be the hardest jump to make in the sport. The size difference between a guy like Colby Covington and a guy like Dricus du Plessis is massive, and it's very difficult to make that jump and be successful. GSP did it, but that's because it was Michael Bisping who was champion. If JDM was a natural 185 pounder, I think he's better than Dricus, but I think Dricus would simply outmuscle him quite easily, which is why he would win. I think JDM is perfect for 170. Moving on to another middleweight who is Sean Strickland. Strickland is going in the decent chance tier. I think if JDM is to beat anyone in the top 5 at 185, it's Strickland. Strickland can be imposing on the feet because of his pressure, and he will be noticeably bigger than JDM. But I can just see JDM picking him apart at distance with his straight punches, and Sean would get outstruck for 5 straight rounds, even despite the size difference, because Sean doesn't really use his size at all, and he doesn't even punch like a middleweight. Moving on a bit further up to Nassourdine Imavov. This is quite a tricky one. Again, I think JDM is much better technically, but would he overcome the massive range, height advantage, power advantage that Imavov has? Imavov would also be able to mix in the wrestling. It's quite a hard one to call. You have to favour Imavov being the bigger man, but if JDM can bulk up properly and he's not too undersized, he may win. Moving on to the fighter who I think has the biggest chance of beating JDM, Khamzat Chimaev. To not only be the smaller man versus Chimaev, but also a striker primarily, I think it's an unwinnable fight, especially considering that Chimaev has packed on more muscle at 185, and JDM would be the one to adjust to the division. I think Chimaev would simply submit him quite easily. And that's going to do it for the video. Let me know who you agree with, let me know who you disagree with, like and subscribe, goodbye.